By the turn of the 19th century, the United States was becoming a trade and military powerhouse fueled by imperialist principles, and wanted a canal across Central America. After failed negotiations, the U.S. helped Panama free itself from Colombia, which became independent at the cost of the Canal Zone, which America finally returned nearly 100 years later. The controversial Panama Canal connected the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans, reinventing trade and helping America become the greatest superpower on Earth. Throughout its history, the United States has been driven by imperialist principles, which led to the creation of the Panama Canal. They began in the American Revolution, as the colonies fought for control over resources and lands to expand their economy, territory, military, and government, making the nation influential and powerful. As a result, American efforts to expand west and build an empire were very strong, and their ideologies would be the only imperialism in the Americas. Essentially, the US wanted to be the big kid on the block in the West. This resistance against other powers, particularly Europe, inspired President James Monroe to create the Monroe Doctrine in 1823. It proclaimed that America had the right to forcefully intervene with any influence or conflict anywhere in the Western Hemisphere. At the time, the US couldn't back it up, but as the country gained power over the 1800s, the Monroe Doctrine was fulfilled. By the 20th century, America had become an imperialist powerhouse, making Teddy Roosevelt the perfect president for the time. Elected in 1901, he spread many imperial ideas, and saw America as the greatest and most beneficial country on Earth. In 1902, German and British forces harassed and blockaded Venezuela for not paying their debts, known as the Venezuelan debt crisis, which Roosevelt was forced to intervene in. He got them to leave, and was determined to never again have any European powers in the West, leading to the creation of the Roosevelt Corollary in 1904. This was the magnum opus of American imperialism and reignited the Monroe Doctrine, making the United States the police force of the New World. During 1852, and after many territorial gains by the U.S., a young Ulysses S. Grant led the 4th U.S. Infantry Regiment through the Isthmus, and saw the potential of the region. 14 years later, President Grant ordered several commissions to search for viable canal routes in the region, which all came back unsuccessful. This crushed Grant's dreams for canal and put a temporary halt on the fever. Others were looking to put a canal there too, however. In the mid-1800s, French engineers were given permission from Colombia, who governed the isthmus at the time, to build a canal. By 1880, the Universal Interoceanic Canal Company was formed to oversee the project, and Ferdinand de Lesseps, the engineer behind the revolutionary Suez Canal, led it. De Lesseps was confident that the new canal would be as easy to build as the Suez had been, and severely underestimated the difficult terrain and conditions of the work zone. By 1888, and after the deaths of 22,000 workers from mosquito-transmitted malaria and yellow fever, France's attempt to connect the oceans was called off. They reattempted the canal a few years later, but to no success. America now had uncontested access to the isthmus, but Congress became more interested in a canal through Nicaragua. They realized that despite the greater distance between oceans, the Nicaraguan route was cheaper, had better conditions, and wasn't really controlled by anyone. Yet as the U.S. was preparing to begin this canal, Philippe Benoit Varia, a French engineer turned diplomat, proposed a sale of the half-finished French canal to them. He began a campaign to convince Congress against the Nicaraguan route, and when it came time for a vote, Philippe handed out Nicaraguan stamps highlighting the dangers of the active volcano near the lake, convincing Congress against the route. Yes, the Panama Canal as we know it was only possible because of stamps. Crazy, right? Opposition from Colombia was America's last big hurdle. Teddy Roosevelt had attempted to pass several agreements, namely the Hay-Haran Treaty, but they still stubbornly refused. Colombia didn't want to give up the valuable land, and the U.S. would only purchase from Philippe if Colombia could be convinced. The Panamanians wanted independence, and using this to his advantage, Philippe convinced Panama into making him their ambassador. Shortly after, he began an insurrection in Colombia, which gave Roosevelt the opportunity to send a fleet of warships to the isthmus, blocking any reinforcements from reaching Panama. On November 3rd, 1903, Colombia released Panama. But only 15 days later, Panama lost its full sovereignty when their ambassador, Felipe Benaviria, signed the Hay-Benaviria Treaty, though not one Panamanian agreed to the terms. This treaty gave the U.S. a century of control over the 10-mile-wide Canal Zone in exchange for compensation and defense. Shortly after, workers from across the world were brought in, and on May 4th, 1904, the long-awaited canal was begun. From 1904 to 1914, the canal was built. It took the effort of 40,000 workers from the United States, Central America, and the Caribbean. The chief engineers were George W. Goethals and John Findlay Wallace, who were tasked with maintaining the flow of work through any means necessary. Consequently, the zone acted like its own nation, with judicial systems, a constitution, police, stores, etc. In addition, white American workers saw far better pay and quality of life, and did the safest jobs, while the other workers faced subjugation, dirt cheap pay, and did the most dangerous work. This was all in order to increase efficacy and reduce costs, resulting in worker strikes and very low morale. The canal officially opened on August 15th, 1914, and was fully managed by the U.S. until September 7th, 1977. Protest against American occupation began in the 1960s, as many Panamanians resented them and saw the canal as a foreign flag piercing the heart of Panama. The U.S. did little to settle the turmoil until 1977, when 39th President Jimmy Carter signed a treaty with Panamanian Chief of Government Omar Torrijos, known as the Carter-Torrijos Treaty. This treaty gave Panama partial control over the canal until 1999, when they would fully acquire it. It had been an American symbol for decades, but Jimmy Carter felt the U.S. was unjustified in keeping it. This decision was very controversial, and many Americans protested the handover, seeing Carter as an unpatriotic coward and foreigner lover. Despite the opposition, the agreements remained, and by December 31st, 1999, Panama became fully independent. Looking back, why did America even want the canal? And of all the powers who aimed to build it, why was the U.S. the country to do it? As America ascended in prestige, trade powers like China wanted them as a new partner, requiring the U.S. to develop their maritime capabilities. For this, the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans would have to be connected via a canal. At the time, the only way for boats to navigate from one to the other was down the east coast of the Americas, around the dangerous waters of Cape Horn in South Chile, and onto the Pacific, or vice versa. With the canal, the route would be 7,000 miles shorter, and would drastically improve the United States' abilities. The United States had come to occupy several island territories in the Pacific and Caribbean, which were key in spreading their influence. Subsequently, a fast means of naval travel was crucial for the continuation of this land, requiring a canal to connect the oceans. Thirdly, America could maximize their influence on their southern neighbors with the canal, which would act as a bridge between them. To the U.S., Central and South America were just another aspect of manifest destiny and needed support. The Panama Canal has numerous frontiers, and has changed history in many ways. To start, the independent nation of Panama was created to facilitate the canal, and wouldn't exist as we know it without. It created a shorter, safer maritime route that connected Earth's largest oceans, and more than 3% of global trade passes through it. It massively boosted America's empire, which contains countless frontiers in itself, and served as a symbol and catalyst of U.S. influence. Over the decade taken to build it, the canal employed over 40,000 workers, and is the largest industrial project in U.S. history. It is also considered as one of the 7 engineering marvels of the world. Every effect the Panama Canal had on history, and every frontier it broke, would take forever to summarize, but this is a start.